Hello, and welcome to Feeling This Life. We're a family support podcast that dives deep into the triumphs, challenges, and strategies that are part of the lives of those who care for young children who are blind and low vision. I'm Paige Maynard, and I'm a teacher of the visually impaired and early interventionist at VIPS, Vision Interventions and Parental Support.
I'm Jenny Castanier. I'm the Family Services Coordinator at VIPS. I am the mother of 3 girls, and my youngest has a visual impairment.
And I'm Dr. Kathy Smith, an independent research and educational consultant out of Fort Collins, Colorado, as well as a former early intervention provider for families of young children with visual impairment. So we are thrilled to have Dr. Penny Rosenblum back with us for the 4th season of Feeling This Life. Our theme this season is Stories Beyond Sight, the Power of Perspective. We are interviewing individuals with blindness or low vision and their family members. So Dr. Penny, I would like to have you introduce yourself again so we can remember more about you and your role.
Sure. Well, it's great to be back with you, Kathy, and your audience. So thanks for the invitation. So I live in Tucson, Arizona, and right before this podcast taping, I was actually out with a friend. We were walking in the desert. It's lovely out here. And as a person with low vision, I may not appreciate the desert the same way my friend who I was walking with does, because I don't quite see the details that she does. So I see those big green cactuses with the arms, but I don't see that cute little hole where there's a cactus wren poking its little head out. So my world as a person with low vision, I definitely miss a lot of the details. And this is in part due to a combination of the nystagmus I have, which looks like the world should be jerking to me, but I can assure parents and others that a child with nystagmus, the world is not jerky to them, even though their eyes are looking around like they're jerking. And in my case, my nystagmus was secondary to my congenital cataracts. And cataracts are that cloudiness that happens in the lens of the eye. And the lens is actually in the middle of the eye, so we can't see it. But in my case, because my mother had the German measles, or what we call rubella, when she was pregnant with me, I was born with those cataracts. They were removed when I was a preschooler. Had I been born today and not 60 years ago, they would remove those cataracts before I was 2 months of age, and I probably would have better visual acuity than I do as a 60-year-old adult who didn't have her cataracts removed until preschool. I also am being monitored very closely for glaucoma, which is pressure on the optic nerve that slowly restricts my visual field. So for my own self, like when I'm riding my bike, I have a hard time seeing anything that's coming up on the right-hand side of me. So I have to do a lot of head movements to find things to look at. You probably can tell I'm a pretty active person, Kathy. I take pottery classes. I'm not riding my bike. I like to hike. I like to walk. Love to go out to dinner. Enjoy going to the movies. So as a low vision person, I'm out and about with my husband, with my friends, and keep them busy.
That's great to hear. And thanks for sharing about your diagnosis. Certainly the most common question I get asked is, what does my child see? And since I don't have low vision myself, it's difficult to explain it sometimes. So it's really beneficial to hear that.
I think one thing that it's important, though, for us to think about is one child's low vision is not another child's low vision, or one child's blindness isn't another child's blindness, because we're all what we call multisensory people. We use what vision, if we have it, to the ability that we can. We use what hearing we have to that ability. As somebody, whether you have blindness or low vision, you're really going to depend on your sense of touch. I always think of a story with my parents when I was a little girl. My bedroom faced a fairly busy street, and across the street there was a strip mall. And one night I went running into my parents' bedroom, and I'm like, I hear voices. And my parents got up and they came in my room, and they did not hear a thing. And, they assured me it was a dream, and put me back to bed. And 5 minutes later, I'm in their bedroom going, "They're scary voices. They're scary voices." No. And my dad went outside and walked around the house, couldn't find anything. And what I was hearing was a couple that was arguing in the parking lot across the street.
Oh, wow.
It's not that
Yeah.
my hearing is so much better than anybody else's, but I've, as a low vision child, really learned to rely on my hearing. And as an adult, I have continued to do that. Now that I'm hit 60, starting to, like most people, start to have a
Oh
little bit of diminishing of that
no.
hearing capability. And
Yeah.
I notice that more because of my low vision, how much I rely on my hearing. So I think anything parents can do to help their child use that vision they have, but also to focus in on those other senses and help your child learn to listen and help your child learn to feel with their hands, feel with their feet, smell. All those things can be really helpful to you. I mean, we've all been in a mall and we know where the cinema bun store is. Maximize that with your child. It's really important.
That's true. And I completely agree with you. I always teach new teachers in our preparation program that we need to, it doesn't matter what the child's vision is, we need to teach them more about all their senses. So they all need to have tactile experiences, they all need to have good listening experiences. So I think that's great to hear you say that. All right. So this season, we're asking our guests to tell us their story. Please share with us your thoughts and what would you like us to know about your story?
Sure. So my mother just turned 90 at the end of August. We're just about literally 30 years apart. And when I was born in the 1960s, we didn't have the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is the law idea that is providing young children early intervention services and teachers of students with visual impairments and orientation mobility specialists working with school-aged children. So my mom really had to advocate. Back then we called her a pushy mom because the word advocate wasn't quite around the way it is for our parents today.
Right?
But I always tell people that my mom became president of the PTA not because she wanted to be president of the PTA, but because she heard they had these newfangled things called a Xerox machine, and she wanted me to have a black copy of the little worksheets that the kids were doing and not the purple ditto. And I bet you most of our audience don't even know what a purple ditto is.
Yes,
So
I'm
really
afraid to
dating
say I
myself.
do. I know what a purple ditto is.
But these were they made multiple copies and the quality was very poor. And so when the
Yes.
Xerox machines came out in the 70s, my mother was elated and thought the school should buy one. But as a low vision kiddo, I did go to public school. I had services from my teacher of students with visual impairment. I was educated and grew up in New Jersey, so got my services from the New Jersey Commission for the Blind. My parents were very overprotective, and probably one of the best things my parents did for me was the summer I was turning 8. I have an August birthday. They very reluctantly let me go to a sleepaway camp for visually impaired children called Camp Marcella. And it was the first time I had an opportunity, Kathy, to be with other kids who were visually impaired because I was the only kid in my school with a visual impairment. And that opportunity to meet other kids, to find out how they were doing things in school, how they were doing things at home, and more importantly, we were as 7 and 8 year olds, we were expected to do things like make our own beds, clean the toilet. I came home from camp and informed my parents 2 weeks later that I did not need to hold their hand anymore to walk on the sidewalk, that they needed to pay me a quarter to make my bed, and they needed to pay me another quarter once a week to clean the toilets because I now knew how to do these things. And as my
Wow.
father used to say, Stella was the beginning of the end. But he would say that, tongue in cheek, because it really helped me start to learn about independence.
Yes.
And I really think when, as families, we can look for opportunities for our child to be with different people than just family and just school, to go out and try new things, whether it's going to his program specifically for children with visual impairments, or maybe your child's really interested in horseback riding. So there's a local clinic for children of their age in your community where, kids are going to learn horsemanship, or your child might want to join a scouting program. I think it's important that we get kids out, and my parents reluctantly started to let me do more and more. And I think that's really helped me be the independent adult I am today.
Yes. Yes, that's wonderful. I think you're absolutely right.
Like I said, I went through public school in New Jersey, so I graduated at the same time as my peers graduated. And initially, I wanted to go to college in St. Augustine, Florida. And honestly, the reason I picked that college was because they had a picture of a swimming pool on the brochure for the college. So it's pre-internet, folks, so that you got these little brochures in the mail from colleges.
Yeah.
When I got to college as a freshman, as an 18-year-old freshman, my mother, the advocate, wasn't there anymore. And Kathy, that was a really tough transition year for me.
I bet.
Because up until then, my mother had always talked to the teacher of visually impaired students, and the teacher of visually impaired students had always talked to my classroom teachers. All of a sudden, I found myself in a situation where I couldn't see what was on the board. I couldn't keep up with the amount of reading that we had to do. I didn't know the community. I remember one Sunday morning getting up like really, really early while my roommates were sleeping. I was in a quad, so there was 3 other girls. Getting a pad and a pencil and going out into the area where the college was and going up to each street sign and getting on tippy toes because I didn't have any low vision aids. I didn't know what those were. And writing down the name of the street and drawing myself a very crude map. So when somebody said, "Hey, let's meet up at the sausage deli on First and Main," I could go look at my little map to find out where First and Main were. I had to find out how to get signed up with services, adult services, so that I could get my books in audio format. It was a tough transition year for me when I went off to college as a freshman. I think as a rule today, we do a much better job of preparing our teens to transition, whether it's into college or work.
Yes.
But I think as a family, even from a very early age, it's so important that you have high expectations for your child. I had high expectations for myself. Not that my parents didn't have expectations for me, but they, would have been pretty happy to keep making my bed for me when I was 8 years old. But, I started to really exert my independence. And some of our kids are naturally going to push for that, especially if they have older brothers and sisters as models. But some of our children are going to be more apt to just say, "Hey, let me sit back, put my hands behind my head and chill, and, somebody can serve me my meals and, put my dishes in the sink for me." Don't get caught in that, folks. Really try to encourage your child to do as much as they can so that as they get older, they can take on more and more responsibility and be ready for that world once they do finish their K-12 education.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And you must have made the transition well if you decided to continue on and get as much schooling as you did, and you still work in the field of education, so you must have done something right to make it happen. So
yeah, Kathy, I for a long time prepared teachers of children with visual impairments at the university level, and now I do a combination of research around individuals with visual impairments, both children and adults. And I also prepare materials to help teachers stay current. So one of the projects I'm involved with is called Project Inspire 2. And we have resources to help young people be better prepared to participate in STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So check out our website, Project Inspire 2. Kathy, I'll put it in the notes that go along with this podcast, I'm sure.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful project.
Yeah. But one of my other projects, and I think it's an important one, so I'll tell the story. So my dad taught my mother to drive in the 1950s when they were first married. And then they moved to, at the time, a rural-ish part of New Jersey. And people were like, "Oh, my wife needs to learn how to drive." And my mother would say, "Oh, well, my husband, Herb, taught me to drive." So my dad started this little side business of teaching people to drive. And by the time I was born, about 7 or 8 years later, it had become his main business. So he owned and operated a driving school. Now, after a couple of years, my mother decided she was too nervous to drive. Then my dad had a kid that couldn't drive because of a visual impairment. Luckily, his other daughter, my sister, he was able to teach her to drive and all was fine and good. But as a child who wasn't going to be able to drive legally, notice I said legally, Kathy, I, didn't have a lot of options in suburbia New Jersey.
Right.
And when I got into college, and like I said, I had to figure out, where the streets were, and I ended up signing myself up for some orientation and mobility instruction along the way in college. I found that a lot of young people with visual impairments aren't prepared to be active travelers if they are a non-driver. And so my colleague Ann Corn and I wrote a curriculum called Finding Wheels. And I so wish I would have had that type of curriculum when I was a student. We just republished the book. The original was in 2000, and we republished it in 2022, maybe 2021. I'd have to go back and look at the date. But it's available from Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And it's actually written for teens and those in their early 20s who have low vision or who are blind. So the curriculum is a great tool for a family to get and have their young person move through it. And you can do it as a family, or your child can do it with the orientation and mobility specialist. Or if your child's a real go-getter like me, they can do it on their own. But we have lots of suggestions on how you can maximize your independence as a traveler. Yeah. For example, the friend that I was with this morning walking out in the desert, had you and I not had this date, I would have said, hey, Marie, do you want to go get breakfast? My treat. Because she drove 20 minutes to get us out to the desert and, drove me home for 20 minutes. And she was 15 minutes away from me. So she spent over an hour driving around so her and I could go walk out in the desert. Other friends she probably would have just met at that location, and it would have been about 10 minutes from her house. But we're friends, and it's a give and take. And that's one thing I've really had to learn as an active traveler. I can't always take. I have to make sure I'm giving back. And so I treat a lot of people to meals, or I buy a ticket for a show that we're going to. And when I was younger and I had no money, I did things like bake people a cake. Your child could go, take care of the neighbor's cat in exchange for some transportation when you're not available to take them to soccer practice.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we don't teach any of our kids enough to give back, that when somebody does you a favor, you have to give back so that it makes sense, right? And this is a perfect example, because you can't always just live in a place where there's great public transportation. Sometimes you have to figure out how to get around without that benefit, although it's nice when you can, right? Well,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I feel like this whole conversation has been great, and you giving advice to parents of young children who are blind or have low vision. Do you have anything else? We're getting close here to the end of our conversation. Do you have anything else you want to make sure you share?
I do. So I mentioned I have a husband, Dennis. We actually have been together 24 years. We've been married 18 of those. And
congratulations.
I think one question I know I often get asked is, is my child going to have a date to the prom? Are they going to date? Will they be able to get married? Will they be able to raise kids? I have lots of friends who are visually impaired, who are parents, who are married or in relationships. And I think part of the way we can support our children in being successful is, again, to have them interacting with other children their age so that they learn some of those social skills. And don't be afraid to give feedback. When I was in high school, I was a little big for my age. I had my glasses. I wasn't the pretty, cute little cheerleader kind of girl. But two of my friends were the cute little cheerleader kind of girls, and both of them were dating, in high school, and I wasn't. So they decided one day they were going to dress me up and they were going to help me meet a boy. And so, they picked out my clothes, they put makeup on me, we went to an event where the lighting wasn't really good, and they knew there was a boy that I liked. And so they're like, okay, he's, at 10 o'clock, look, smile. And, I'm like, okay, I looked, I smiled. I'm like, did he look back? And we did this for quite a while. Well, another friend joined us who wasn't dating anybody at the time. So now there was 4 of us girls sitting, at this table, and they were coaching me on when to look and when to smile. And they're like, he's coming. So he's walking over to us. And he goes up to the fourth girl who had joined us and asked her to dance and not me. And boy, from a social standpoint, that was really tough because, we thought we had done everything we needed to do. I had these wonderful, supportive friends, and then my friend Pam got asked to dance and not me.
Yeah.
But that's part of life.
That's right.
And, learning about flirting and learning some of those, subtle social things. And when I first started dating my husband, at one point we, had a couple dates, and I said to him, I like to hold hands. We went to a restaurant, and sometimes you have to wait for your table. So we're sitting there, we're having a chat. They finally say, Dennis, table for two. So we go up and we start walking through the restaurant. He's following the server. I'm following him because I'm watching his feet, because I always watch the feet of the person in front of me. So if they, step up or step down, I know where the stairs are in an unfamiliar place. I missed that he put his hand out behind him to hold my hand. And so when we sat down at the table, all of a sudden he was acting really different. And finally, after about 5 minutes, I said, did I do something to upset you? And he said, well, you said you like to hold hands. I'm like, I do like to hold hands. Well, why didn't you hold my hand? I'm like, what hand? And then when we really got to have our first real conversation about low vision, that, what? I didn't see your hand. You interpreted it differently.
Yes.
Thinking I was rejecting you, but really you need to understand, you're going to have to take my hand a lot of the times. I'm not going to see those subtle things. And especially if you put me in an unfamiliar environment where I'm really having to focus on using my vision, I was watching your feet. And so, but we had to have a conversation about that. And once we had that conversation, my husband, it took him a while, but he got very good about it, and recognizes that sometimes when I miss something visually, it's not that I'm trying to be rude. It's not that I don't care. I truly didn't see it. Right. And so helping your child be able to have those kind of conversations with their friends, with their scout leader, with the babysitter are really important so that they can explain to people what's happening.
That's terrific advice, I think. And we do hope that we can teach children to advocate for themselves, right? So this is my vision and this is what I need. I think it gets harder when you're a teenager, but
absolutely.
But what parents need to understand is it's harder for every teenager, not just their teenager. So I think that is great advice. So thank you so much, Dr. Penny. We appreciate you being on again. I will make sure that we have the Inspire website in the show notes and a link to where parents can get the Finding Wheels book.
Absolutely.
So
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And as a colleague of mine who was in early intervention for a long, long time before she passed, Susan Greer, always used to say, every parent is doing the best that they can at this point in time. And so please don't be critical of yourselves. Recognize that you are your child's best advocate and you're doing the best that you can. By listening to this podcast, you're definitely demonstrating how much you love and care for your child. Thank you.
So I loved listening to that interview, and I think one of my favorite parts of what Dr. Penny shared with us was really just her stories. I'm curious about what your all's favorite story was that she shared. A lot of them just, I think, were fun to listen to, but kind of also resonated with me. I think my favorite was just the interaction and potential, I guess, quote unquote, argument that could have happened with her and her husband. It reminds me of things that happen in my own house with my husband. He has a mild form of color blindness, so he'll ask me if clothes match, if he's picking out an outfit. But what happens a lot is I'll be in the other room getting ready and he'll say, "Does this go together?" And I'm like, "Does what go together? I don't know. Is it a pants? Is it a shirt? Are you seeing if the dish towel matches the dishes?" Or, it could be anything. And I'll be like, "Does what match?" And then he'll say, "This pants and this shirt." And then I'm like, "You still didn't tell me what they look like." So it's just this reminder of how these things happen in relationships. but also how important that like specific languages and communication is in a relationship, but of course with our kiddos as well, in talking through some of those misunderstandings, or like, I see the world differently than you. So that, I think, was my favorite story. What about you guys?
I like that one too. I do that in my own house. Like, as much as I try to remember to be very descriptive with Hannah, I'm not always, and I'll be like, "Oh, look at that," and she's like, "I can't because I don't know what you're talking about." And so then I'll be like, "Look to the right at the green bush or whatever." So yeah, definitely something that I struggle with, and I can see where that could cause issues, especially like if you're just getting to know the person.
Yeah. So not only do we have to be better at being descriptive of what we're saying to them, but we have to teach them that they have to communicate to us when we say something silly, right? Because, you're not doing it on purpose. You're not trying to be like, "Oh, look at this." You're just, that's just how we talk. And so, they have to give us some grace too, that we make mistakes, and how can we help them. So I mean, thank goodness that Dr. Penny did that with her husband. It sounds like they have a great relationship and they've been together forever. So that, it's nice to hear. I think it's nice for families to hear that, yes, you can have a good marriage and have a family and do all those things and have a job, even though you have a vision impairment. It's going to be okay. All those things are possible.
Yeah,
so
all those things are possible.
Absolutely.
Yes. And it's about communication.
Yes.
So much.
Absolutely. Well, I liked hearing about the copier, because her mom becoming part of the PTA so she could have access to the copier, because this is something that affected my own life. So I'm old enough that when I started to be a TSVI, we had a mimeograph machine. That's all there was at the school. And if I needed to make materials for students, like I remember going to the store, the office supply store, and trying to buy yellow paper because mimeographs are purple and the contrast for purple is yellow. So if I had yellow paper, they would be able to see it better. And like Dr. Penny said, we won't even talk about how horrible they smelled. Oh my gosh, the ink was overwhelming. Like, I can only do 5 pages today because I just can't do it anymore. So we are so, and I think all of us think of the copier as a very old technology, but we still use it. We still enlarge things on copiers.
Yeah, I was excited to hear her say that, because Hannah, she has all the, I don't know what you might think of as traditional resources and tools. Like, she has the Jupiter and all of that. But the thing that she probably uses more than anything at school is the copier. And she gets worksheets and she'll go and she'll blow them up. And that's something that her TVI set up with her, like her own little code. She has her own little drawer in there with her bigger paper. And she'll just run real quick down and make a copy of it if she needs to and come back, because it's not feasible for her teacher to leave the classroom, or her TVI is not with her all the time. And so it's really easy for her to go and do that, and she can decide what worksheets she needs it for. And she likes it so much it's even transferred over. Like at church, she took it upon herself to tell the children's pastor, like, "Hey, I know how to use the copier. Can I use it here if I need to?" And I mean, she really does use that probably more than anything else. And especially now that so much of the work is completely online, like my older girls have their Chromebook issued from the school. They hardly ever bring home anything on paper. And Hannah does have her own Chromebook, and it's larger, but it takes her so much time to like maneuver the screen back and forth to find, like, if it's like these words are in a box, put them in a sentence. Yeah. She has to print out the worksheet because it takes her so long to scroll over and up because everything's so enlarged on that Chromebook. So, yeah, I mean, the copier is definitely still going strong.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's such a surprise to me. And many of our listeners know most of my career has been in early intervention. And so I don't always get to see all of those things that are part of the lives of kiddos who are in like K through 12 schooling. And it's like such a simple, well, copy machine's not super simple, but in terms of assistive technology, such a simple or like thing that's been around a long time is such a useful tool. So that's so interesting to me.
I never dreamed how much she'd use it when they set it up. I mean, I was like, okay, that's a good idea. But I had no idea that it was going to be like life-changing at school.
Yeah, and what a great example of, her being independent. Like, I'm going to take charge of this. I need this. I'm going to ask the teacher or the pastor if I can go do it, and I have the independence, and that will last her forever. I mean, she will be able to do that when she's an adult at a job. So that is a great skill. That is, if we still have copiers, I don't know. Who knows, right? Who knows? Maybe we might just talk to our computer and they spit them out or something. I don't know. Whatever. But it's also a great example of sensory efficiency. So like you're talking about, she can't, she has to enlarge it so big on the computer that it's too hard. So it's actually slowing her down. Having the paper, that's a perfect example of what we mean when we say sensory efficiency, right?
Yeah, as part of the expanded core curriculum. Yes.
Yeah.
So Kathy, what spoke to you? So Jenny, what else spoke to you?
I liked how she talked about how her mom had all these high expectations for her and how good her mom was at advocating for her. And you can definitely see that in her stories. But how after she went to college and moved away, then she had to realize she had to advocate for herself. And that was something she had to learn. And I think sometimes we don't think about teaching our child how to advocate for themselves, or even telling them that's what they're doing. Like, they might think they're sticking up for themselves, but to say, like, this is called advocacy and this is what it is and why you need to do it. And I thought that was something to remember, because we talk about advocacy all the time on the podcast, and we talk about it from the parent standpoint, but we do at some point need to transfer that over.
Yeah, sometimes I like, even for myself, I'll forget that I'm advocating and I'll think, oh, I'm being annoying, or, oh, I'm being needy. And it's like, no, I'm not being annoying and needy. I need to do it with kindness, but I'm advocating for what I need. And it's like reminding yourself what you're doing. But then I can also see like so many situations where like families of like infants and toddlers can like just use the language with their kids. Like, for example, if you're offering them a choice of something, or maybe you're telling you they don't like, what you're doing, you can even just say, oh, good advocating. Thank you for telling me what you need. And that kind of sounds corny, but it helps you get into a good mindset of like referring to what they're doing as telling you or telling others what they need, to kind of, maybe in the future it might maybe help them have less of that, like sometimes that I feel like, no, you're not being annoying, you're telling somebody what you need. So yeah, that advocacy piece I think is big.
Well, and remember too, so this is something we don't talk a whole lot about, but there are federal child outcomes that we look at in special education. So how are kids doing and what level are they at? And one of those federal child outcomes is advocating for needs. That's one of them. So there's only 3 of all the things that we see that are most important for kids to be able to do. Advocating for themselves is, being able to share with us, I need this, I need your help, I need to talk to you, I need to try myself. All those things are things that little ones do. And so it doesn't just start when they get older. It's just not just something we talk about at transition at 14. They should be learning to do that all along. I thought it was really interesting that Dr. Penny referred to her mom and dad as overprotective.
Yeah, me too.
So, and I want to share a little bit about, so I did look into some research and I went down a totally different path. And the path that it led me to was actually talking about previous studies that had identified parents of children with vision impairment as being very directive and being overprotective. And now the studies that we're doing say that, so not only is overprotective a word that we don't have a good definition for anymore, but maybe we're not doing that. Maybe we're helping them, individually. So you have to look at your child as your child. You know what your child can handle visually, but also emotionally and all the other ways. And so then you make decisions about that. So yes, I think the research encourages us to encourage parents to get their kids to do things independently and have little chores. And I love how she came home from camp and told her parents that she had to clean the toilets because that's what they had her do at camp. That's amazing. Yes. I wish
but for a quarter.
Yeah. I wish my kid came home and told me he had to change clean the toilets. That sure didn't happen. But yeah, so we need to encourage parents to do that, but we also need parents to know their children well and what they can handle and when they can handle it.
And I think it's all relative too, as far as like how your family's set up, because maybe if it's your first child, it seems like you're a little more overprotective than, say, if it was your third child. Because sometimes I think to myself, Hannah's our youngest, and I'll be so intent on, I want to, help her be independent, no learned helplessness here. And so I'll be like, you need to do this, like your sister's doing that. And then I realized to myself, like, well, wait a second. She didn't do that when she was 8. She does that now because she's 14. But Hannah's not learning helplessness because she's 8 and not doing what a 14-year-old is. So I like what you said about, like, knowing your child and kind of knowing your situation and taking all that into account.
Yeah, knowing your own child, knowing your own situation. Some of the experience that I have been working with families is that you might be dealing with some of kind of your own feelings and kind of working through your grief about what's going on with your child, and just maybe that your life isn't what you expected it to be, or your child's life is not what you expected it to be. But I think remembering that it's one step at a time, and you're on a lifelong journey, and so is your child. And if it, maybe you do or you don't feel overprotective, but just thinking about what is like the next right step to take with your expectations for yourself and for your expectations for your child. And if you're just always knowing that you're on that journey forward, then, I can really see a lot of success happening that way. And with a lot of my families too, we're not putting our dish, at 6 months old into the sink, right? But we are leaning forward for a bite of our food, right? Or participating in some other way that's appropriate. So yeah, that next step.
Yeah, and that's where your early interventionists can really help you, because they know development well. So they can help you say, this is appropriate, this isn't appropriate, right? Like, so maybe not putting their dishes in the sink at 6 months, but are they, so at 6 months they're doing great eating off the spoon. When is it time to move to them picking the spoon up themselves? And you may not, it's a scary thing. You don't have control over it. So it's nice to have somebody who has a little background or can help you look it up and go, oh, so by a year they should be trying to do it themselves. So let's work towards that.
Well, this was such a good one, ladies. I hope that all of our listeners really enjoyed listening to Dr. Penny, and I just wish you all of the best in your journey with your child and your family, and we are just so thankful for you listening. Thank you so much for listening to Feeling This Life. Did you know that this podcast is part of a research study? By filling out the survey in the show notes, you can help our community learn more about how podcasts impact those who care for children who are blind and low vision. If you'd like to support us in making more episodes of Feeling This Life, look for the donation link in the show notes. The show notes include links to resources related to today's episode and ways to get in contact with us. Please join us again next time for another episode of Feeling This Life.